This video is going to be my long-term review of the Performance TransIt 2-bike hitch rack. This is a rack that I gave a pretty good review over 3 years ago, but it was fairly new back then. And I've kept this thing on my vehicle constantly. It's endured Florida rain, heat, through the summer, cold in the winter. I've kept my car outside most of that time with the rack on it. I hardly ever take this rack off. So it's definitely endured the elements. So how does it hold up? And do I think it's worth the price? This bike rack is about half the price of similar racks to this style. You can usually find this rack for about 180 bucks on performancebike.com, and they have it listed at a higher price because it's usually always on sale. So after all this time, what do I think? Let's get into it. Because the bike rack has endured the elements, the color has faded, so it's almost like a powder coat now. I can put some WD-40 on here and change it back to a black color, which I've done a couple times. So I've got a few rust spots where the paint's worn out. You can see some here and over here. These trays, one thing that I really like about this rack is how you can position a bike to where it does not contact the second bike. So you can move a bike this way and move the other bike this way, and that way the handlebars will not touch the saddle of each bike. Now these trays, you just loosen these knobs and they slide. This side is really stiff. In fact, I have to really bang it. So it's not a really quick and easy adjustment. But that's one of the things that you're gonna get with a bike rack that's not as high-end as something like a Yakima or a Thule or a 1-Up. This side moves a little bit better, so I can move these knobs, slide the trays. I could put some WD-40 on here, it would probably help, but even one of these trays has always been pretty stiff. So that's one complaint that I have about the function of the rack. Now, these pads have held up remarkably well. I mean, they are still fairly soft, and one nice thing is that these pads have never scratched a bike. And I actually put some frame saver tape on my bikes where this contacts the top tube, but it has never scratched a bike. Another really nice feature that I use a lot is the fact that you can lock these. And so you would slide it down, put the key in, it comes with 2 keys, you just turn it and lock it, and that way nobody can lift up on this. And it is very hard to get the trays off with pressure on. In fact, it's almost impossible. So if the hook here is pushing down on the bike, it's going to be pretty secure. Now obviously someone could steal components and things like that, and if I am at a place where I'm leaving the bike out for a long period of time, I will use a second cable. But if you're running into the grocery store, this is a feature that I use all the time. Now another complaint is this one is kind of hard to get the key in and turn it. I have to kind of jiggle the key. The top one works very smoothly, but again, you know, that's something that you're going to get with a rack that is not as high-end. I love how quick I can load a bike on this rack. And that's done. It does come with Velcro straps for you to be able to put over the wheels. I actually don't use these very often at all, especially if I'm running up to work. I carry my bikes to and from work a lot. I ride at lunchtime on a very regular basis. And so you can do the Velcro straps. I have to get a little more slack in there. But for interstate driving, I do use those, but these wheels sit so far down inside these trays that really there's no way that they're going to come out unless you ever get a flat tire. And that is something that's happened to me before. And what happens is the bike will sink down a little bit. It didn't come out. The hooks are long enough to where they probably won't come out, but that is something that you've got to be careful about with this style of rack. If the tire goes flat while you're driving, the bike can kind of loosen up a little bit. And that's why I recommend probably a safety strap to maybe just put around the rack, either a security cable or actually a strap that you can cinch down. If you're going on a long trip, especially for the outside bike, the inside bike probably will not fall off if you have the Velcro straps on the wheels, but that is something that you need to be careful about. I also like how this arm folds down. We have a Honda CR-V that has a hatchback, and or a lift gate if you want to call it, and so it's nice to be able to lay this down, to get into the back of the CRV and then close it back up. Now you do have to remove these pins to do so. Some of the other ones, like the Yakima 2-timer, which is a similar style, you would just pull a little lever out, drop it. Actually, you drop it that way to get it out of the way. The thing about these pins, let me show these up close. These are secured by this little cable so you don't lose them. We have the 4-bike version of this, and we lost, or the cable broke, and so, you know, of course, eventually you're gonna lose that pin because you take it out, you set it down, and you forget it. So, and that's another little slightly negative thing I can say about that. You know, just the fact that this cable did end up breaking on my 4-bike one, but on this one, it's actually been used more. They haven't broken, so they're still there. Now I'm sure you could easily get another pin from Performance and bolt it on there if you ever did lose one. I do want to mention that on this car, even with the bike loaded closest to the vehicle and a mountain bike with some pretty wide handlebars, I can still open the trunk and access inside the trunk. Now that may not be the case with your car, and it definitely wouldn't be the case with a hatchback or an SUV. But on this car, I can access the trunk, which is really cool. As I showed, I think in my first review of this, it does have a lock on this bolt that goes through, so no one could steal the rack, or worse, the rack and your bikes on it. And of course, you can see this is an 1.25" hitch receiver. This comes with an adapter, so you can use it on a 2-inch hitch receiver, which I have on our CRV. So that is something that's nice too, the fact that you can use it on both size hitch receivers. So up until 2 weeks ago, I could say that I loved this rack, especially for the price. I think the features and everything are spot on for the price. It's a really good value. But I had an incident, and those of you who are watching or stay tuned to my channel know where I'm going with this. And that is the fact that last weekend's race, I took this rack and put it on our Honda CRV with a 2-inch hitch receiver, and it must have sat closer to the car and a little bit lower, because I had my mountain bike, the first bike closest to the car, with carbon wheels, and the exhaust hit the carbon wheel and melted it. And you can go back and see my video on that. I'm not really going to go into that. So that has changed my perspective about this rack, because the bikes sit a little bit lower on this rack than other racks, especially as they sit down into that channel. And let me show it up close so you can see what I'm talking about, and you can decide if this rack will be good for your car. So you can see how the wheel dips down in that tray. Now this car, I've never had a problem. So the hitch receiver in relation to the exhaust is a little higher than what's on my CRV. It's almost level. And I will show my CRV just so you can know what I'm talking about to decide if this would be a rack that's good for you. And so I've never had a problem with this car, but it was the CRV. And let me show you, I'm not going to put the rack on, but I'm going to show the hitch receiver in relation to the exhaust on the CRV. So this vehicle was the culprit, combined with the rack, that melted a $1,000 carbon wheel. And you can see it's an aftermarket hitch, and the hitch receiver sits about 2 to 4 inches lower on this vehicle, and the exhaust was pretty much in line with the front wheel on my mountain bike, and that's what caused the problem. So it's going to depend how your exhaust sits in relation to the hitch receiver. So that's very important if you're thinking about this rack. So because of my very expensive incident, I am getting rid of this rack, and I'm going to get the Yakima 2-timer, which is a very similar style rack. It's just a higher end rack, and it does sit higher in relation to the exhaust, so I'm not going to have that issue with the exhaust hitting the wheel. So if you want to see what that rack is like, in about another month or so, I'm going to do a review on the Yakima 2-timer, and maybe even do a little bit of a comparison with this to let you know if I think it's worth it. So would I recommend this rack? Well, about 3 weeks ago I would have said absolutely. I've never heard of this problem with an exhaust hitting a carbon wheel. After it happened, I've talked to people and they have heard of it, so it's not a completely isolated incident. So it's very important to make sure your wheel doesn't sit too close to your exhaust. So I had actually planned to do a long-term review before that incident happened, and again, give this rack a big thumbs up. Now you're going to have to use your judgment and how your exhaust sits in relation to your hitch receiver. This rack, if it works, this rack is a great value. I would absolutely recommend it if it fits your car in that aspect, because the features and everything of the rack, they work really well, especially the locking feature. Even the Yakima 2-timer doesn't have locking arms. You have to use an extra cable that doesn't actually come with the rack. So that's going to wrap it up with this long-term review of the Performance TransIt 2-bike hitch rack. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching.